The first thing I did after watching Dune Part 2 is go back and watch my review for Part 1. And my intuition was right. What I said for Part 1 applies to Part 2 as well. That the film is visually breathtaking. But is that epicness enough to tell a good story? Just like this film, there are two other Indian films that has redefined what an epic film is, which is Tamil film Captain Miller and the Malayalam film Malaikotai Valibaan. Let's talk. Hello guys, I'm Nona and let's begin with talking about Dune Part 2. Now if you don't know, these films are based on the books and they are really vast, and that's the reason even for the first part I saw a video explaining the world and then going into the film, which really helped. And just like that, before watching Part 2, I saw a really good recap by the Nerdist. I'll put the link to that video in the description. Check it out, it's without spoilers and really sums up the first film really well with some interesting inputs which are part of the book but are omitted in the film. I felt I understood the first film better after watching the recap because it was explained really well. And it really helped because I saw Part 1 only once when it was out in theaters, that's it. I never went back to it. And that film just drops you in the world. It's very elaborate, there are so many moving parts. That's why it's easy to get lost. And I honestly don't remember anything memorable from Part 1. And maybe that's because it was a setup. But with Part 2, because it's a follow-up and it gives a lot of payoffs, it's much more engaging and memorable. Now the first thing we have to talk about are the visuals. And what makes it stand out is that there's, a lot of course CGI and VFX, but it's very hidden. You cannot really tell what is VFX and what's not. Of course, you can assume the spaceships, the blast, everything is VFX, but the blend of everything is so good because the visuals are so distinct from what we get from other, blockbuster films. It's a desert. There's nothing much. And in that, the way they have, infused the sci-fi elements and the way they get the scale right. You can tell how one thing is bigger than the other thing, how smaller these characters are compared to the ships. I cannot even imagine the IMAX experience of this film. And what adds to the visuals is the sound design, which is so good. The reverbs you feel. There's a little camera shake given when we are close to a very big object and you can feel it. And there are so many sequences which give you goosebumps. But it's not just because the visuals are great, but because those sequences are backed by narrative significance. And that's why it gives you that high, what we get for a mass film. I was really overwhelmed watching this film because we get so many payoffs. We get moments when the character does something and it is so epic, visually as well as narratively. Interestingly, the background music is not much compared to the first one, whatever I remember. The theme music is played, I think, twice, that's it, in the film. But they are very important moments. Now, if you're familiar with Star Wars, the Dune franchise will feel very similar. Why? Because Star Wars is actually derived from Dune. But the difference is Star Wars is very much about right and wrong, black and white, whereas Dune lies in the grey area. There's a lot of politics at play. There's a lot of deep social commentary about religion, about fate, about prophecies, and how it all can be a tool of the oppressors to control the oppressed. And the film is quite dense. As I said, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of characters, there's a lot going on. But if you take a step back and just think about the story we get in the films, it's quite simple. It's a revenge story with a lot of politics, a lot of prophecies, and set in an intergalactic futuristic world. It follows that hero's journey. Our hero is an underdog. He's up against really big and powerful people, but he's also the chosen one. He's the messiah for these people. But the good thing is that he's not just up against these villains, the antagonists, but also the inner conflict he has. He's fighting against his own fate, and the only way to move ahead for him to accept it. He cannot keep running away from it for long. Now, what I really enjoy in films like this is that when the hero is a step ahead than everyone else, because he has some power or some strategic advantage, that he's one step ahead, that he is not, covering up in a story. We as audience don't know what the hero will do next. Now the world building is so strong that there's also this feeling there is a very big picture, but the story is just a small part of it, and hence maybe irrelevant, and that can be counted as a demerit. But for me, I actually find it very fascinating because there are some elements in the narrative which give you that feeling that there's so much to explore. There are certain characters to arrive which are very important in this world, but that's far in the future. Now the story takes place over a period of time. It's not just few days or a week or a month, it's more than that. And hence there are a lot of jumps in time which you can feel, and that's where you get a sense that there are some leaks in the story, that you're missing out something, like there was more between these two scenes but we missed out on it. And that's why I feel like this could have been a series like Game of Thrones, because there's so much much there. And I've heard from the people who have read the books that, they have eliminated a lot of things. And that's why, just like part 1 where Zendaya's character barely had anything, in this film, Florence Pugh barely had any scenes. But unlike the first one, the way this film ends, it's quite satisfying and you want more. It doesn't end as if it's incomplete, which the first one felt like. A lot more can come after this, but even if it doesn't, we still get a closed narrative because the story arcs for a main characters kind of fulfilled. I like that in the second part they used a narrative tool to make the audience understand what's really happening by a character recording like a personal diary and saying everything that has happened. So it gives the audience an idea what's going on. Now I don't know if it was always supposed to be like this or after the feedback from the first one they added this to make it simple for the audience to understand. Now talking about the similarities between this film and the two Indian films, Captain Miller and Malaikotai Valibaan, is that all three films are experiential cinema, that you need to go to a theater and consume them because they are meant to be lived with on the big screen. They are designed in such a way. The way these films use the scale, you can feel it. The visuals that you see on the screen are not just randomly arranged. They are put together with a meaning behind them. There's a specific narrative significance to them. And without spoiling, if you see, the main character in all these films is going through inner conflict. They are up against their fate, and by the end they have to accept it. One more similarity to note is that all of them end with a hint at a sequel. And the term I want to give these films is intellectual mass. That these are not mass films made with the lowest common denominator, but demanding more from the audience watching them. They are not the films that are saying just sit, relax and enjoy what we are giving you, but asking you to be involved in the narrative. And I think this is the evolution of the mass films in India and the big blockbusters in Hollywood. We have come in an era where a Barbie and Oppenheimer can be the blockbusters. And with 2024, we are seeing more of it. And there's a lot more to come, which I talked about in this video, the most anticipated films of 2024. But what do you think? Is this just a one-off thing, or is the evolution of big films really happening? Let me know in the comments below and I will see you next time.